They thought we would break.
That was the point of the arenas, built not as prisons, not as laboratories, but as theaters of collapse. They wanted to watch us shatter, and they wanted to savor the noise of it. The Ordai believed the human scream was a kind of currency. They said it had resonance unlike any other prey they had tested. Not a sharp cry, not a whimper, but a layered, complex note. Fear, pain, defiance, memory, all braided into a sound that refused to be simple. They studied it as though cataloguing music. They measured frequency, pitch, duration. They turned agony into data and data into entertainment. The arenas were monuments to this obsession. White metal rising into the void, a bowl carved out of arrogance, lined with seats that glowed faintly from the presence of thousands of watching Ordai. Screens floated in the air, showing close-ups of human faces contorted in suffering. Amplifiers caught the smallest tremor of a throat and magnified it until it became thunder. Every detail was designed to humiliate and record, as if our torment could be refined into a masterpiece. We were brought in chains, wrists, and ankles, clasped by machines that moved us like dolls. Soldiers herded us forward with precision, their insectile carapaces gleaming under the artificial light. Their mandibles clicked with smug commentary, voices carrying up to the terraces. Fragile, soft, ill-shaped, that was their litany. They called us variables. They called us livestock. They wondered aloud how such a brittle species had managed to leave its cradle at all. The first test began without ceremony. A platform rose from the arena floor, carrying a machine whose arms ended not in blades, but in rods that vibrated at frequencies tuned to human skeletons. The air shifted as it activated, filling the lungs with invisible pressure. Bands tightened around wrists, cuffs locked ankles, and the lights above blazed white. The sound came quickly. Screams ripped out of throats before anyone could think, automatic and desperate. The terraces erupted in delight. The Ordai leaned forward in their seats, transfixed. They were not predators killing prey. They were gourmands, savoring flavor. They wanted layers, variations, crescendos. They laughed when one voice broke into sobs, cheered when another surged back louder than before. The pain was calculated, not lethal, enough to ruin balance, enough to set nerves on fire, but always pulled back before the body could surrender to shock. They wanted hours. They wanted to harvest everything we had. At first, they got what they wanted. But the Ordai had made a mistake. They thought suffering always led in one direction, that pain always broke into silence or obedience. They had never accounted for the strange things humans do when pushed to the edge. The first change was small. A voice in the back row stopped screaming and began humming, low and steady, like someone remembering a tune half forgotten. It was ragged, but it was deliberate. The machines recorded it, confused. The Ordai whispered among themselves, curious but unconcerned. Then, another prisoner caught the rhythm and tapped it out with the heel of a hand against metal. 1, 2, pause. 1, 2, pause. A child's counting game transposed into torment. Something shifted. The sound of screaming didn't vanish, but it changed shape. Instead of chaos, it became layered. Hums threaded through cries, taps punctuated sobs, whispers began to spread, fragments of old songs, prayers, jokes told badly. The Ordai leaned closer, instruments recalibrating, trying to understand. This was not the pattern they expected. One prisoner laughed. The sound startled even the others. It wasn't the laughter of madness, but the sharp bark of someone finding a crack in the walls. A guard jabbed him with a shock rod, but the man only coughed blood and laughed again. The terraces hissed with disapproval. The announcer tried to cover the moment, calling it aberration, a trivial outburst. But unease had crept into the cadence of his voice. The Ordai adjusted the machines. New stimuli rained down, searing heat, bursts of blinding light, jolts that snapped muscles into spasm. The arena stank of sweat and blood. Still the rhythm held. Not everyone kept it. Some screamed themselves hoarse, some wept openly. But enough held the line, enough hummed and tapped and whispered that the pattern never broke. It was infuriating. The Ordai prided themselves on control. Yet here was something slipping through their fingers, something their algorithms couldn't measure. Their pleasure began to fray. The terraces grew quieter, not with boredom, but with something closer to suspicion. The machines escalated again. Screens descended, showing images meant to wound the soul. Loved ones in torment, homes burning, failures relived on endless loop. This time, they expected collapse. No body could resist forever, but surely memory would do what pain could not. A thin young prisoner stared at his screen, eyes dark with exhaustion. The image showed his mother, broken and pleading. He did not cry. He tilted his head and muttered, voice flat, "You don't even know how to lie properly." The translator caught it, broadcast it to the terraces. A ripple of unease ran through the Ordai. They were used to begging, not ridicule. Others picked it up. Some spat insults, some chuckled through tears. A woman murmured the name of her street back on Earth as though planting a flag. A man whispered a recipe. Fragments of life poured into the arena, banal and ordinary, but unbroken. The Ordai's instruments tried to categorize the sounds and failed. The announcer faltered, searching for words to reassert dominance. The terraces murmured louder, colors flickering across alien skin in agitation, and then something unexpected happened. From the center of the pit, one man straightened, despite the bands still biting into him. He had been silent until now, enduring without a word. He opened his mouth, and instead of a scream, a deep, steady note rolled out. It was ugly, harsh, more vibration than melody, but it carried. It threaded through the arena like a blade sliding into a sheath. Every human present recognized it instantly, though none could have explained why. A signal, a promise. The Ordai froze. Their instruments spiked into chaos, readings contradicting themselves. The terraces leaned forward in perfect, silent unity. And then the lights went out. The white blaze of the arena vanished, leaving only the thrum of machines winding down. Darkness swallowed the terraces. For a long, breathless moment, nothing moved. Then, from somewhere deep in the structure, came a sound. Not mechanical, not human, a knock. Slow, deliberate, once, twice, pause, again. The Ordai did not understand it. But we did, and we smiled in the dark. The dark did not last. The Ordai would not allow it. Blue emergency strips lit the walls of the arena, weak but steady, and revealed the chaos their blackout had left behind. Smoke curled from a ruptured console. A technician's claws clicked in panic as he slapped controls that no longer obeyed. Sparks spat onto the terrace floor, and for the first time since the spectacle began, the Ordai audience murmured not in pleasure, but in unease. Down in the pit, the prisoners were still. No thrashing, no cries for mercy. They sat, knelt, leaned against each other, as if they were waiting for something only they could hear. The silence unsettled the watchers more than any scream ever had. The announcer tried to mask the tremor in his voice. A minor interruption. We resume the schedule immediately. Subjects, prepare yourselves. The machines surged back to life. Bands tightened again, cuffs dug into skin, vents blasted heat and cold in quick succession. Frequencies whined through bone, needles pricked and withdrew, shocks snapped muscles into knots. The arena filled with engineered torment, a storm of pain meant to prove the blackout had changed nothing. But the humans had changed. Screams still came. No one could deny what the body felt, but they were not the same as before. Beneath them ran a hum, low and deliberate, the thread of that single note from the man who had broken the silence. Others picked it up, weaving it through their own voices. It was not harmony, it was not music. It was survival made audible, a refusal to fracture. The terraces grew quieter as the pattern held. The Ordai leaned forward, confusion darkening their shimmering skin. Their instruments recorded data that refused to align. The more the pain escalated, the steadier the rhythm became. One of the older prisoners lifted her head. Her hair was ragged, her body shaking, but her eyes were steady. She exhaled slowly, as though the agony were nothing more than weather. The sound of it carried upward, thin but unmistakable, and the audience shifted uncomfortably. A guard lashed out with his pike, cracking it across her back. She stumbled but did not cry out. A thin laugh slipped from her throat instead, half choke, half defiance. Others caught it, echoed it. Soon, the arena held something the Ordai had never anticipated: laughter inside pain. The announcer faltered. "Increase output," he snapped, and the machines obeyed. Pressure mounted, lights seared, illusions flooded the air. Memories twisted into knives. Loved ones crying, cities burning, failures replayed on endless loop. The Ordai expected collapse. A thin young man stared at the image before him, his mother's face contorted in grief. He did not break. He tilted his head and said flatly, "You don't even know how to lie." The words rippled outward, caught by the translator mesh, thrown into the terraces. The Ordai shifted in their seats, their colors dimming with irritation. They were used to begging. They were not used to ridicule. The young man's remark opened a breach. Prisoners began to speak, not in pleas, but in fragments of life. A woman whispered the name of the street where she'd grown up. A man recited the steps of a recipe. Another muttered a joke, bitter and short. These were not screams. These were roots driven into the soil of memory where the machines could not reach. The elder Ordai in the terrace had seen enough. His skin shimmered violet, a warning shade, and his voice cut through the arena. Enough. If pain will not yield their essence, starve them of it. Starve their noise, the machines shut down in unison. The sudden absence of agony left the prisoners trembling, twitching, gasping. The Ordai expected gratitude, collapse, silence. Instead, the pit filled with laughter again, raw, ragged, but alive. It rose like smoke into the terraces. The elder's mouth tightened. He gestured sharply. Guards entered, towering, carapaced figures with shock pikes crackling. They waded among the captives, striking, forcing them upright. Clubs fell, rods jabbed, electricity cracked. Still, the laughter persisted, stumbling but unbroken. One guard dragged the baker forward, the man who had mimed kneading bread in the air. Bloodied and bent, he was hurled against the machine at the arena's center. The elder leaned down, his voice carrying, "Show them what you are, or your end will feed the floor." The baker raised his head. Blood clung to his lips. He said nothing, only smiled, a small, private smile that made the Ordai bristle. The elder flicked his claw. A guard drove a shock pike deep into the man's side. His body convulsed, every muscle locking. The terraces held their breath, waiting for the scream. None came. What broke from his throat was a single, deliberate note. Harsh, sustained, as steady as steel. It cut through the arena like a blade. Instantly, others picked it up, weaving their own jagged tones around it until the air itself vibrated with defiance. The Ordai recoiled. Their instruments scrambled to categorize the noise, but the data collapsed into nonsense. The more they tried to measure it, the less sense it made. For the first time, fear threaded their ranks, not much, but enough. Then the emergency lights flickered. Not out, not yet, but dimmed into a half glow that threw long shadows across the arena. On the far side wall, a hairline crack had appeared in the pristine metal. Black, jagged, slowly spreading, the technicians froze. The elder's color flickered, uncertain. The prisoners fell silent all at once, as though listening. From the fissure came a sound. Not the groan of failing metal, not a trick of machinery, a rhythm. A knock once, twice, pause again. The terraces erupted in alarm. Guards lifted their weapons. Technicians shouted readings that made no sense, and in the pit, the prisoners smiled. The knock came again, slow, patient, deliberate. The crack in the arena wall widened with a sound like stones splitting under ice. Dust sifted down, fine as ash, settling on the prisoner's skin. The Ordai shouted orders, their voices shrill in panic. Guards formed ranks around the pit, weapons leveled at the growing fissure. No one in the terraces noticed the prisoners stand a little taller. Chains still bound their wrists, cuffs bit into their ankles, but they straightened anyway, as if the sound in the wall had pulled their spines into line. The knock became a pulse. It echoed through the floor, through bone, through memory. The prisoners felt it before they heard it, an old rhythm, familiar though none could name it. Their bodies answered instinctively, muscles twitching in time. A guard barked something guttural and brought his pike down on the nearest captive. The man staggered but did not fall. He only raised his chin toward the wall, where the crack was no longer a line, but a wound, spilling faint white light. The elder Ordai snapped his claw, demanding reinforcement. More guards poured in, their armored feet clanging against the terrace steps. But the prisoners were not looking at them. They were listening, waiting. The wall gave way with a sharp report, shards of alloy shrieking across the pit. The Ordai recoiled. Light poured in, not cold artificial blue, but something warmer, thicker, alive. And with it came sound. It wasn't a voice, not exactly. It was closer to a roar, low and endless, rising in pitch until it filled every corner of the arena. The prisoners' chains thrummed in resonance. The Ordai clutched at their ears, their colors flickering in distress. The roar cut off as suddenly as it had begun. The silence left in its wake was suffocating. Then the wall fell. A figure stepped through the breach, tall, wrapped in the dust of corridors, clad not in armor, but in rags, scorched black. A human. His eyes burned, his breath ragged, but he stood unbowed. In his hand, he carried nothing but a length of pipe bent at one end. The guards surged forward. Electricity crackled, blades hissed free. The newcomer moved first. One swing of the pipe shattered a guard's pike, sent shards clattering across the pit. Another guard lunged. The pipe caught him beneath the jaw, snapping his head back. The prisoners shouted as one, voices layered in disbelief and triumph. The Ordai elder roared, his skin flashing crimson. Contain him? But the more guards swarmed, the more chaotic it became. The prisoner with the pipe fought not with precision, but with fury, each strike fueled by something older than fear. He moved as though pain had trained him, as though every wound carved in the pit had been a lesson. The prisoners surged to their feet. Chains rattled, cuffs snapped against bone. They shouted, not words, but raw sound, a storm of noise that filled the arena. The Ordai had never heard anything like it. It wasn't resistance, it was invitation. The man with the pipe drove his weapon into the machine at the arena's center. Sparks erupted, flames licking upward as conduits split. The restraints clamped to the prisoner's limbs faltered, then released with a screech of failing servos. One by one, chains fell slack. The Ordai technicians screamed warnings. Systems overloaded, consoles bursting into fire. The terraces dissolved into chaos as spectators trampled one another to escape. But the prisoners didn't move toward freedom. Not yet. They moved toward the breach. The man with the pipe turned to them. His chest heaved, blood slicked his ribs, but he stood. He lifted the bent length of metal like a banner, and every one of them followed. The elder Ordai tried one last time to command. His voice boomed across the arena. You cannot leave. You cannot endure beyond this chamber. You are only fuel. The response was laughter, hard, sharp, unafraid. It crashed upward from the pit, louder than the alarms, louder than the flames. The prisoners climbed the rubble, one after another, bodies broken, but spirits alight. They moved into the breach, into the dark beyond, where corridors twisted and the pulse of machinery pounded like a buried heart. The Ordai guards gave chase, their weapons crackling, their orders frantic. But the prisoners did not run. They turned corners, they struck from shadows, they fought with fists, teeth, scraps of steel torn from walls. Every loss bled into fury. Every fall stoked the fire higher. At the head of it all moved the man with the pipe. No one knew his name. None asked. He fought as though he had always belonged here, as though the breach in the wall had been carved by his will alone. The corridors stretched endless, lit by trembling red alarms. Ahead lay more walls, more locks, more battles. None of it slowed them, because now they were no longer prisoners. They were something the Ordai had never intended to make. And the thing they had become was moving toward the heart of the complex, where the true engine of their torment pulsed and roared. The corridors narrowed as they descended. The walls sweated condensation, pipes rattled overhead, the stink of ozone and rust mingling in every breath. Behind them, the echo of boots and shrieks pursued. Ahead, only the throb of machinery like some vast buried lung. The prisoners moved in single file now, their numbers thinner. Some had fallen in the escape from the arena, cut down by blades, caught in crossfire, crushed beneath collapsing stone. But those who remained carried more than themselves. They bore scraps of chain to use as whips, fragments of pipe sharpened into knives, jagged steel held like relics. The man with the bent pipe led. His gait was uneven, blood soaking the side of his ribs, yet he did not falter. Every step seemed to drive the rhythm of the group, a beat they matched unconsciously. An alarm wailed, rising and falling, cutting into their ears. Panels in the ceiling hissed open and drones dropped like carrion birds. Their optics flared scarlet, wings of razor steel spinning into motion. The first drone dived. The pipe swung. Metal met metal, and sparks exploded in the dark. The drone crumpled, body twitching as it skidded along the corridor floor. Another followed, slicing through the air. A prisoner leapt to meet it, chains wrapped around his forearms. The impact tore flesh, but dragged the drone down long enough for others to stamp it into ruin. The corridor filled with smoke, heat, screams. But not all the screams belonged to humans. A drone veered, its targeting systems failing, and carved straight into a squad of Ordai guards rushing to cut them off. Flesh parted like paper, blood spattering the walls. The guards shrieked, their formation shattering, and the prisoners plunged through the gap. Every fight cost them. Blood pooled in their footprints. Limbs bent at wrong angles. Breaths grew ragged, yet still they pressed forward, driven by something no lash had ever been able to break. The elder Ordai watched it all from a high chamber, walls lined with scrying screens. His claws clicked against the console as he saw the humans carving a path where none should exist. Rage burned, but beneath it a thread of something colder, unease. They should have collapsed, he hissed to the others. The calculations predicted failure after 90 units of pain. They should be ashes by now, but the screens told another story. The humans bled, broke, and yet moved faster with every wound. Their noise was no longer agony, but something worse. Song. A harsh, wordless chant that rose with each clash. The elder Ordai tightened his grip on the console. The sound seemed to seep through the glass into his skin. Below, the prisoners reached a junction. 3 corridors stretched ahead, identical save for the glow at their ends. The man with the pipe stopped. His eyes flicked from left to right, then upward, as though listening. The others waited, silent, every breath loud in the stillness. Then he chose. The center path they followed without question. The air grew hotter, denser, filled with the roar of turbines. The floor vibrated beneath their feet, and ahead the corridor widened into a chamber vast enough to swallow them whole. The engine room. It rose like a cathedral of steel, columns stretching into shadow, gears the size of ships grinding endlessly. Rivers of coolant hissed in trenches, and at the heart of it all pulsed the core, a sphere of black glass veined with molten light. Every circuit in the complex fed into it. Every scream from the arenas had echoed back from it. The prisoners stood at the threshold, their ragged breaths mingling with the thunder of machines. For a moment none spoke. Then the man with the pipe took one step forward, and the ground itself seemed to quake in answer. The Ordai were waiting. Dozens lined the walkways, weapons raised, armor gleaming in the light of the core. Their commander, a towering figure plated in obsidian, stepped into view. His voice thundered through the chamber. "You dare bring your filth here?" This is the heart, the breath, the hunger. You are nothing. The prisoners said nothing. The commander raised his blade, black and serrated. "Kneel, be fuel once more, and your deaths may be swift." For a long moment, silence. Only the grind of gears and the hiss of coolant. Then the man with the pipe smiled. A broken, bloodied smile, and the prisoners began to laugh. It started as a low rasp, then spread, building into a wave of sound. Harsh, cracked, defiant. The laugh of those who had already lost everything and yet somehow still stood. It filled the engine room, echoing from the steel, until even the gears seemed to turn in rhythm with it. The Ordai commander faltered. His blade dipped a fraction. He had fought 100 wars, crushed 1,000 species. None had ever laughed in the heart of the core. The man with the pipe lifted his weapon high, and the humans surged forward. They crashed into the guards like a storm, chain against blade, bone against armor. Sparks flew, blood sprayed. The engine room became chaos incarnate, and above it all, the core pulsed faster, as though it too had begun to listen. The first strike rang out like a bell hammered by thunder. Steel shattered against steel, sparks blossoming in the haze of the engine room. The Ordai commander swung his serrated blade with a speed no human should have been able to answer. Yet the man with the bent pipe met him, blow for blow, the clash echoing across the chamber like a drumbeat of defiance. Around them, chaos took form. Prisoners hurled themselves at armored guards, unarmed bodies colliding with plated monsters, chains wrapped around throats, jagged steel tore gaps in alien flesh. The air thickened with smoke and heat, blood spattering the great pistons that pumped endlessly in the walls. For every human that fell, another rose. They fought like creatures who had already been to death and found it unimpressive. Screams filled the room, but these were no longer cries of torment. They were war cries, sharp enough to cut through the roar of engines. The Ordai fought with precision, with weapons designed for slaughter. But precision faltered against frenzy. Blades, meant to cow, shattered against wrists that refused to break. Shocks from electric batons sent prisoners convulsing, but when the current stopped, the humans rose again, staggering forward with teeth bared. The commander pressed his assault. His blade slashed deep into the man with the pipe, opening his shoulder to the bone. The weapon should have dropped from his grip. Instead, he shoved forward, ramming the pipe into the commander's chest with a force that cracked armor plating. Both staggered back, blood running in twin rivers, black for the Ordai, red for the man. The core pulsed brighter. veins of molten light racing faster across its surface. The air in the chamber thickened, trembling as though the machine itself leaned in to watch. A prisoner hurled a chain, wrapping it around a guard's weapon, dragging it down. Another leapt atop the Ordai's back, teeth tearing into the soft joints between armor plates. He was thrown free, spine shattering against the wall, but the moment of distraction gave the next prisoner time to ram a jagged shard of steel into the alien's throat. Blood sprayed the floor in sheets. The prisoners cheered, a savage exultation that echoed high into the catwalks above. For the first time, the guards faltered. Their formation broke, steps hesitating. The elder Ordai, watching from his scrying chamber, felt it. A tremor, not of machines, but of certainty. His claws dug into the console. This was impossible. This was outside every calculation. Humans did not win. They expired. They shattered. They begged. But these did none of those things. These laughed. Back in the engine room, the commander's roar cut through the din. His blades swept wide, scattering prisoners with a force that left 3 broken on the ground. He advanced again on the man with the pipe, relentless armored bulk blotting out the molten light of the core. "You bleed," the commander snarled. "You falter. You end." The man's breath rattled, chest heaving. His vision blurred from the blood loss. Yet his mouth curled into a grin, cracked and crimson. Not yet. The pipe lashed out, not toward the commander, but toward the core. The bent metal struck sparks from the floor, arcing toward the black glass sphere. A crack spiderwebbed across its surface, faint but real. The chamber groaned. The gears shuddered as though choking. The light within the core flared, then dimmed, then pulsed again, faster. The commander froze. His eyes darted to the core, then back to the man. Rage flickered into something else, fear. The prisoners saw it too, and they howled. They surged with renewed fury, not fighting for survival now, but for victory. They dragged Ordai down beneath sheer weight, clawed hands ripping away weapons, teeth tearing flesh. Blood soaked the floor so thick it turned the steel slick. The core's hum deepened, vibrating in their bones. Its light spilled across their faces, painting every scar and wound in molten gold. The commander roared and charged again, blade raised. But the man with the pipe didn't meet him this time. He sidestepped, dragging the bent metal along one of the coolant lines. Sparks leapt, liquid hissed, steam engulfed them both. The commander swung blind, blade carving only air. The man's pipe drove upward, cracking the alien's jaw. The commander reeled back, and the prisoners surged forward, chains and knives and fists hammering into him. He bellowed, staggered, struck down 3 more, but the tide did not stop. One prisoner leapt onto his back, jamming a shard of glass into the exposed joint at his neck. Another slammed a length of rebar into his knee. The commander fell to one side, armor splitting open in rents. The man with the pipe raised his weapon one last time and brought it down across the commander's skull. The crack echoed like the toll of a bell. The Ordai's body convulsed, then collapsed, armor clattering against the floor. Silence rippled through the engine room. Guards froze. The prisoners stared. For a heartbeat, even the core seemed to pause. Then the light within the black glass sphere flared white, brighter than before. The ground shuddered. The air grew heavy, alive, and in the wake of the commander's death, something vast stirred inside the machine. The prisoners stood, heaving, bloodied, staring at the core. Its light flickered faster, like a heartbeat racing towards something catastrophic. The elder Ordai saw it on his screens, his claws trembling now. He shouted orders to shut down the chamber, to sever conduits, to cut power. But the technicians shrieked back that the core no longer answered them. Its pulse was independent, rising beyond their control. The humans turned to the man with the pipe. He bled from half a dozen wounds, swaying on his feet, but his eyes locked on the core with grim certainty. He raised the pipe again, pointing not at the guards, not at the exits, but at the heart of the machine itself. Every prisoner understood. They moved as one, charging the core, chains flailing, weapons raised. The Ordai guards shrieked and fired, but the humans did not stop. Bullets tore flesh, beams scorched skin, and still they ran, leaping across coolant trenches, climbing the iron lattice toward the pulsing sphere. The first struck it with a fist, bones shattering but leaving a smear of blood on the glass. The second followed with a chain, sparks flying where steel met crystal. The third rammed a jagged shard straight into a glowing vein. The core screamed. Its light lashed out in searing arcs, bolts tearing into walls, vaporizing machinery. The prisoners screamed back, not in pain but in fury, their voices rising as though to drown out the impossible machine. And the man with the pipe climbed last, staggering, body breaking but unstoppable. He raised his weapon high. The core's light flared in anticipation, like an eye widening in dread. Then he brought the pipe down. The impact split the black glass. Cracks raced across its surface, lines of fire branching outward. The roar of the machine became a howl, not mechanical now, but something that sounded alive and terrified. The chamber shook violently, walls splitting, coolant rivers exploding into steam. Guards and prisoners alike were hurled from their feet. The core's glow spilled out in blinding torrents, threatening to devour everything. And in that white flood of light, as the walls of the engine room began to collapse, the prisoners did not scream. They laughed. They laughed louder than the machine itself, louder than the shouts of the Ordai, louder than the sound of a world tearing itself apart. The elder Ordai, watching through his screens, staggered back as the light consumed the chamber. His reflection stared back at him in the glare, skin pale, eyes wide with something he had never felt in centuries of conquest. Not rage, not command, not triumph. Fear. The light did not end. It seared through the engine room, swallowing walls, devouring walkways, blinding every eye. The prisoners were silhouettes against it, mouths open in laughter that outlasted the machine's scream. Guards clawed at their helmets, shrieking as their armor cooked from within. Steel warped, gears melted, the cathedral of engines collapsing inward under its own trembling weight. And then the light imploded. It vanished into the core's cracked shell with a sound like the universe inhaling. Silence dropped heavy as stone. The chamber was gone, walls reduced to jagged ribs, floor split by fissures that bled steam. The core itself was no longer whole. Its sphere lay shattered into shards the size of men, molten light trapped in each fragment. Pulsing weakly, as though still alive, out of the haze, shapes began to move, prisoners staggering, burned, coated in blood and ash, but alive. Their laughter had stopped, not out of despair, but because breath had become precious. Yet their silence carried weight. It spread through the ruin like a presence more vast than the collapsed machine. The man with the pipe crawled free of rubble, half his face masked in blood. His weapon was bent further, nearly useless, but still he held it as if it were the spine that kept him standing. His eyes swept the chamber. He counted. Dozens still stood, more than any Ordai prediction would have allowed. Across the ruin, the surviving guards dragged themselves upright. Their armor was split, optics cracked, weapons sparking. The Ordai commander was dead, his body entombed beneath fallen girders. Yet still the soldiers raised their arms, trained them on the staggering humans. But they did not fire, because the prisoners did not advance. They simply stared. No words, no shouts, no desperate charge. Only the silence of those who had endured the heart of torment and emerged. That silence worked deeper than any blade. The Ordai faltered. Fingers twitched on triggers, but no bolts came. The soldiers backed away step by step, retreating into the smoke. The prisoners moved instead toward the shards of the core. Each fragment glowed faintly, humming with broken energy. One man knelt, touched the surface with trembling fingers. The light flared at his touch, searing his skin, but he did not withdraw. He lifted the shard, cradling it like a torch. Others followed, gathering fragments, holding them high. Dozens of faint lights swelled into a constellation in human hands. In the wreckage of the Ordai's hunger, the prisoners carried the heart of its power like plunder. High above, in the scrying chamber, the elder Ordai staggered back from the monitors. The images burned into his mind. Humans standing in ruins, carrying pieces of the core as though they were weapons. He whispered a phrase in his native tongue, a word that meant both unmeasured and unkillable. His attendants glanced at him in confusion, waiting for orders. None came. Below, the prisoners began to climb. The collapse had torn new paths through the structure, jagged slopes of rubble leading into corridors once sealed. They ascended slowly, bleeding and limping, but without hesitation. The shards of the core lit their path, white fire casting long shadows on the walls. No one spoke, not because they lacked words, but because words could not contain what they had become. The corridors ahead twisted upward, air growing colder with each step. The hum of machinery receded, replaced by a distant roar, a sound like endless wind clawing at steel. The prisoners pressed on, the man with the pipe at their head, his pace uneven but unbroken. At a junction, they found resistance. A squad of fresh Ordai blocked the passage, armor unscorched, weapons intact. The squad leader raised his rifle, voice booming, "Halt! You will kneel!" The prisoners did not kneel. They raised their shards. Light flared across the corridor, dazzling the Ordai. The squad fired blind, bolts cutting into the walls. Prisoners surged forward. No chains now, no bent rebar, only shards of the core, blazing like molten knives. They carved through armor as if it were paper. The squad screamed, cut down in moments. When silence returned, the prisoners stood dripping with alien blood, shards still glowing in their fists. The man with the pipe moved to the front, pressing his hand against the cold bulkhead at the corridor's end. He felt vibrations. Machines, yes, but beneath them something wilder, freer. Air. They were close. They forced the bulkhead open with stolen weapons and shards used as levers. Metal screeched in protest. Hinges snapped. The door gave way, and the world roared in. Wind howled down the passage, carrying dust and ice. The prisoners stepped into a cavernous chamber with walls of translucent crystal. Above them stretched sky, dark, endless, pricked with stars. For the first time in captivity, they saw the universe unshuttered. The prisoners stopped as one. Some wept silently, tears freezing on their skin. Others laughed softly, a sound almost fragile compared to the battles behind them. But the man with the pipe looked not at the stars, but at the horizon. A line of black structures loomed, towers bristling with guns, domes glowing with Ordai light. Beyond them, faint but real, he glimpsed terrain scarred by trenches, smoke rising from far-off ridges, a battlefield. The prison was not alone. It was a fortress, part of something larger, an entire network built on torment. The arena had been only one chamber of a labyrinth stretching for miles. The war outside was still raging. Behind him, a prisoner whispered, "What now?" The man did not answer. He simply raised the bent pipe once more, pointing toward the horizon, and the others followed. They marched into the night wind, shards burning in their hands. Their silence louder than any scream. Above, unseen, the elder Ordai's fleet circled the skies, their commanders demanding reports. None could explain what had risen from the core. None could calculate what the humans carried out into the cold. But already whispers spread through the ranks of the Ordai. Whispers of prey that would not die. Whispers of laughter in the heart of the machine. And with each step the prisoners took across the frozen plain, those whispers grew. The plain stretched wide under a sky of frozen stars. Wind carved its teeth through the jagged terrain, rattling across broken stone and the black geometry of the Ordai fortress. Towers rose like fangs, their tips blinking with cold fire. Between them, trenches crawled across the ice, filled with shadows moving in disciplined rhythm. The prisoners trudged forward, a column of limping figures lit only by the glow of their stolen shards. Blood trailed behind them, steaming in the frost, but no one fell. Not now. The man with the bent pipe led, each step hammering a rhythm the others matched. His body was failing, but his will had become a chain that bound them all together. The first flares went up, brilliant streaks hissing into the sky. Alarms followed, booming across the plain, carried on iron throats of machines. The fortress stirred. Guns rotated, trenches shifted, and out of the black mouths of gates poured the Ordai. Rows upon rows, armored, armed, perfect in their cruelty. The prisoners stopped. They stood in the open, ragged bodies swaying, faces bloodied. Against the regimented tide of the Ordai, they looked like broken things, shadows held together by stubbornness alone. The Ordai commander at the front raised a claw. His voice carried through amplifiers, a booming declaration: "Pray, you flee one cage to crawl into another. You will kneel, you will be measured, you will be consumed." The wind died for a moment. Silence spread across the plain, then a laugh broke it. One prisoner, ribs shattered and arm dangling useless, let out a cracked chuckle. Another joined, then another. Soon the whole column was laughing, hoarse, ragged, unstoppable. The sound carried across the ice, not joyous, not mocking, but something deeper. The laugh of those who had already been to the end and walked back. The Ordai ranks shifted uneasily. Discipline wavered. They had seen defiance before, but not like this. Not prey that laughed in the face of extinction. The man with the pipe lifted his weapon. His arm trembled with the weight, but the gesture was unmistakable. The shards ignited. Dozens of fragments of the core flared as though waking from slumber, light racing along their fractured veins. White fire poured from human hands, painting the plain in brilliance. The Ordai flinched, their armor glowing under the unnatural glare. The humans charged. It was not a formation, not a strategy, but a flood. Shouts and laughter mingled as they hurled themselves into the teeth of the fortress. Shards slashed through armor, burning where they touched. Chains whipped, jagged steel pierced. Fists struck with the weight of 1,000 hours of pain. The Ordai fired volleys, lines of energy cutting through the dark. Prisoners fell, bodies torn apart, but the charge did not slow. For every human cut down, another leapt over their corpse, shard blazing in hand. The clash met in the trenches. The Ordai thrust with bayonets, stabbed with claws, but the prisoners drove into them like fire into dry grass. The first line broke. The second followed. Discipline shattered as humans screamed and laughed and bled and killed. The man with the pipe waded into the fray, his bent weapon catching a blade, knocking it aside, then crushing into the alien's skull. He stumbled, nearly fell, but another prisoner pulled him up. Together they drove forward deeper into the fortress's defenses. The battlefield burned. Alarms howled. Towers unleashed torrents of fire, searing arcs that melted ice into rivers. But the shards answered. Prisoners hurled them like spears, streaks of molten light that pierced guns, toppled towers, detonated bunkers. Each fragment carried a piece of the core's death scream, and the Ordai felt it carve into their flesh like memory made blade. For the first time in generations, they faltered. They retreated. The elder Ordai watched from high above, his vision split across a dozen tactical screens. He saw his soldiers crushed, his lines splintered, his fortress breached by prey unarmed and broken. His attendants screamed for reinforcements, for orbital fire, for anything, but his claws trembled too badly to give the order. He heard their laughter through the comms, raw and unstoppable, and it shook him deeper than any weapon. Below, the battle turned. The prisoners poured into the trenches, dragging Ordai from cover, ripping weapons from claws, turning guns against their makers. They did not fight like soldiers. They fought like storms, chaotic and merciless. No tactic contained them, no formation resisted. They endured every strike, answered every wound with another step forward. The plain became a graveyard of metal and flesh. Towers fell. Trenches filled with corpses. Fire turned the ice to steam that blanketed the battlefield. In the center of it, the man with the pipe stumbled to his knees. Blood ran down his side in rivers. His breath came in ragged gasps. But when an Ordai raised a blade above him, he swung the pipe one more time, catching the alien in the throat. Both fell, but only one rose again. He stood, swaying, weapon slick, eyes fixed on the fortress gates. They loomed ahead, black and massive, still sealed. Beyond them lay the heart of the complex, the command that had orchestrated every scream. The prisoners gathered, fewer now but enough. Their shards burned dimmer, their bodies staggered, but their will stood unbroken. Together they turned their eyes to the gates, and they laughed again. The sound carried into the fortress, echoing through its halls, seeping into the bones of those waiting inside. The elder Ordai heard it through the walls of his chamber, and for the first time in centuries of conquest, he knew the sound of inevitability. The gates began to tremble under the blows of bent pipes and chains and shards of molten glass. Each strike rang like a knell. The fortress shuddered, its heart pounding in dread, and as the gates cracked, the laughter grew louder, promising what waited within. The gates groaned like dying beasts. Each strike sent cracks racing along their surface, fragments falling in showers of black stone and molten metal. The air boiled with heat from the shards, the fortress itself sweating under the assault. The Ordai had designed their walls to withstand siege engines, orbital bombardment, storms carved from plasma. They had not designed them for laughter and broken bodies that refused to stay down. With a final shudder, the gates collapsed inward. The prisoners surged through in a flood of steam and fire, their shadows long against the ruined entrance. Inside, the fortress was a cathedral of precision, corridors lined with polished stone, banners dripping with the crimson sigils of the Ordai, light bending from crystal lamps that hummed with alien resonance. It was meant to intimidate, to project control and inevitability, but now its beauty was scarred. Smoke clung to the walls, alarms wailed, and every polished surface reflected not order, but chaos. The prisoners advanced slowly at first. Their bodies were wrecked, every step dragged from will alone. But as the fortress swallowed them, the shards in their hands pulsed stronger. The walls themselves seemed to recoil from the fragments, as if memory etched into stone recognized the core's agony and shrank from it. The Ordai waited deeper inside, Troops in ceremonial armor lined the corridors, blades gleaming, rifles humming with power. Their discipline was tighter here, their fear hidden beneath layers of tradition. At their center, commanders barked orders, voices steady but eyes flicking toward the growing sound, the steady rhythm of human boots on stone, the rasp of broken lungs that refused to fall silent. The clash came fast. The corridor filled with smoke and screaming. Energy bolts tore through the air, searing flesh and stone alike. But the prisoners had no hesitation left. They poured forward, shards blazing, improvised weapons whistling through the air. A man with half his face burned leapt onto a gunner's back, driving a shard into the seam of armor until both collapsed. A woman missing 3 fingers caught a blade in her other hand and twisted, snapping the alien's wrist before she brought a chain around its throat. The Ordai were trained for domination, for prey that submitted once force was shown. They were not trained for prey that treated pain as fuel. Lines broke, formations collapsed. The prisoners drove them back room by room, their laughter echoing in halls meant for silence. Up above, the elder Ordai watched the feeds collapse one by one. The fortress was supposed to be untouchable. Its corridors had never been breached, its banners never torn. Now the humans were inside, their noise defiling its sanctity. His claws dug furrows into the arm of his throne. He wanted to believe it was still salvageable, that the fortress could still crush this infestation. But in the marrow of his bones, he knew something had shifted. The prisoners pushed deeper through galleries and war rooms, past shattered statues of Ordai heroes, through barracks where soldiers scattered before them. Each chamber became a furnace of violence, lit by shards and smeared with blood. And still they moved forward. The man with the pipe led when he could, stumbling but unyielding. His breath rattled in his chest, his eyes burned with fever, but his steps never stopped. Prisoners looked to him even as they fought their own battles. His weapon, bent and battered, had become more than metal. It was a standard, a mark that they were still moving forward. In the heart of the fortress, the great hall waited. Its ceiling rose high, hung with banners and armored trophies from 100 conquered worlds. The floor was inlaid with black stone polished to a mirror's shine. At its far end stood the throne, and upon it the elder Ordai, surrounded by his guard. The prisoners spilled into the hall, their boots leaving trails of blood across the polished floor. The shards flared, light ricocheting off the banners, staining the trophies with an unearthly glow. For a moment silence fell. The elder Ordai rose. His armor was ancient, etched with victories, crowned with spikes of obsidian. His voice thundered across the chamber. "You are nothing but noise. A swarm of broken things. Do you think yourselves unkillable? Pain is not strength. Pain is proof of weakness." His guards moved forward, blades raised, rifles aimed. The prisoners did not answer. Their silence was heavier than any shout. Then the man with the pipe lifted his weapon once more. His body shook with the effort, but the gesture was enough. They charged. The hall erupted into carnage. Guards met prisoners in a clash that rattled the banners from the ceiling. Blades struck shards, energy bolts cut through bodies, chains cracked against helmets. Screams echoed against the stone, mingled with laughter that refused to die. The elder Ordai waded into the battle himself. His blade was longer than a man's body, its edge humming with ancient resonance. He struck down a prisoner with a single sweep, cleaving shard and flesh alike. Another he impaled, lifting them into the air before tossing them aside. He fought with precision and power, each movement honed across centuries of conquest. But the prisoners did not scatter. They closed around him, pressing from all sides, their shards hissing against his armor. For every human he cut down, 2 more filled the space. His blade grew heavy, his breath rasped inside his armor. The laughter followed him with every swing. The man with the pipe staggered into the circle. His eyes burned, his chest heaved, but he faced the elder without flinching. The Ordai sneered. "You, the broken leader, do you think yourself more than prey?" The man said nothing. He only raised the bent pipe again. They clashed. The Ordai's blade smashed down, sparks flying as it struck the pipe. The man staggered but did not fall. He struck back, the pipe ringing against armor, denting but not breaking. Again the blade descended, again the pipe rose to meet it. Each impact drove the man lower, blood pouring from his wounds, but with every strike, prisoners surged closer. They dragged at the elder's arms, slashed at his legs, drove shards into the seams of his armor. He roared, shaking them off, but they returned, relentless. The pipe rose one more time. The man's strength was gone, his body broken, but his will carried the weapon upward. The blow struck the elder's helmet, cracking it down the center. Light bled from the wound, alien blood spilling onto the polished stone. The elder staggered, disbelief etched into his eyes. He had faced armies, raised civilizations, and never faltered. Now he felt fear, raw, unfamiliar, and unstoppable. The prisoners closed in. Shards pierced his armor, chains tightened around his limbs. The great blade fell from his hands, clattering across the floor. The man with the pipe collapsed beside him, weapons slipping from his grasp. But as he fell, his eyes met the elder's, and in that silence, the message was clear: "You will not break us." The hall rang with laughter, louder than ever, echoing through every corridor, every chamber, every scarred wall of the fortress. The sound spread like wildfire, carried through comms, through vents, through the very stone itself. It reached every Ordai ear and filled them with something they had never known, the certainty that prey could rise and become predator. Above, ships stirred in orbit. Commanders screamed for orders, for retaliation, for anything to restore control. But the sound of human laughter reached even them, and hesitation spread like disease. In the heart of the fortress, the elder Ordai struggled to his knees. His guards lay dead, his hall burned, his blade lost. Before him, the prisoners stood bloodied, dying but unbroken. Their eyes burned brighter than his banners, their shards brighter than his lamps. And then the fortress lights went out. Darkness swallowed the hall. The only glow came from the shards, dozens of points of fire held by trembling, bloodied hands. They lit the humans' faces in terrible relief, shadows deep, eyes bright. In the silence that followed, the elder realized the truth. The fortress was no longer his. It belonged to them. Smoke drifted through the shattered corridors, clinging to stone, seeping into every chamber of the fortress. The banners that once hung proudly now smoldered in torn strips, their sigils blackened, their meaning reduced to ash. The air reeked of blood, oil, and the acrid tang of melted crystal. The prisoners moved slowly, their bodies wrecked from the night of battle. Some crawled, some staggered, some leaned on the broken remnants of others. Yet they moved, always forward. Their laughter had faded to ragged silence now, but the silence itself was heavier than thunder. It filled the fortress like smoke, pressing against every Ordai who still lived within. In the great hall, the elder Ordai remained slumped against the ruined steps of his throne. His armor split and oozing, his eyes dark with exhaustion, he looked up at the circle of humans gathered around him. Their faces were cut, swollen, burned, broken in every way a body could be, but their eyes glared like embers that refused to fade. He rasped words that faltered in his throat. "You should not exist. You were supposed to kneel." The man with the pipe swayed forward, every step of victory snatched from death. He no longer raised his weapon, it was too heavy now, too bent, too slick with blood. But he stood, and in standing he said everything. The elder lowered his gaze. For the first time in his long life, he bowed his head. The prisoners left him there. Death would not grant him escape from what he had witnessed. Living with the echo of their laughter, that was punishment enough. Word spread quickly. The fortress's comms arrays, cracked and half destroyed, still carried fragments of the chaos into orbit, where Ordai ships circled uneasily. What they heard was not orders, not discipline, not the booming certainty of command. They heard silence, then laughter, then silence again. For Ordai captains hardened by centuries of conquest, that was worse than any battle cry. The infection spread outward. Across the prison camps scattered through the star system, whispers grew. The humans had not broken. They had risen, weapons torn from the bones of their own agony, and they had gutted the fortress from the inside out. Guards noticed the shift first. Prisoners who had once lowered their heads now stared openly, their silence no longer submissive, but suffocating. Some began to hum, low and uneven, a sound that grew in rhythm. Others started to laugh in the darkness of their cells, the sound rolling through the barracks like a wave. The Ordai tried to stamp it out. Beatings, executions, whole barracks burned to ash. But it did not stop. The silence always returned. The laughter always came back. The more they punished, the more it spread. In orbit, hesitation turned to fracture. Commanders argued, ships hung still, and some crews, terrified of the sound infecting even their hardened ranks, cut comms entirely. The chain of command frayed, splintering as no clear orders came from the fortress below. On the planet's surface, the survivors of the battle moved through the ruined fortress like ghosts. They found armories and cracked them open, seizing weapons that hummed with alien power. They found stores of food and ate until their stomachs ached. They tended to their wounded with whatever rags they had left, their hands steady even as their bodies shook. They did not celebrate. There were no cheers, no songs of victory, only silence, broken by the rasp of breathing, the drip of blood, the hum of shards still glowing faintly in their hands. Victory was too small a word for what they had done. Survival was closer. Defiance was truer. At night, as they huddled in the wreckage, one of them asked a question into the dark. His voice was cracked, nearly gone, but the words carried, "What now?" No answer came at first. The man with the pipe lay among them, breath shallow, eyes closed. He did not speak. But then another voice broke the silence, hoarse but steady. "We keep walking." And that was enough. Far beyond the planet, other species listened. Not willingly, news carried on stolen frequencies, smuggled by shadows, whispered through chains of spies who had long lived under Ordai rule. The stories came jagged, broken, half-wrapped in static, but the meaning was unmistakable. Humans had faced the crucible and had not shattered. The Ordai fortress, untouchable for generations, had been breached from within by prey that should have been extinct. To the conquered, it was a spark. To the Ordai, it was a disease. The elder remained in his ruined hall, his guards dead, his banners fallen, his fortress silent. He listened to the echoes of boots and laughter that still haunted the corridors. He tried to command, but his voice no longer carried weight. His soldiers avoided his gaze. His empire had cracked, not in battle, but in certainty. The belief that prey always broke, that had been their foundation, and now it was gone. One night, as the fortress lay quiet, he heard it again. Laughter. Not from humans, but from his own soldiers. Nervous, trembling, uncontrolled. They laughed in their barracks, unable to stop, driven half-mad by the infection.
It spread through them like fire.
He realized then that it was too late. The sound would never leave this place. It would follow his people across the stars, a reminder written in their marrow. There was something in the galaxy that would not bow. Back in the shattered halls, the prisoners gathered around a small fire built from the splintered remains of banners. Their faces flickered in the glow, hollow-eyed and gaunt, but still alive. One of them leaned forward, speaking softly.
"They thought we'd break." Silence followed, heavy and unbroken.
Then another answered, just as quiet. "We didn't." The fire cracked. Beyond the walls, the night stretched endless and cold. But inside, in the silence and the faint glow of shards, something vast had shifted. It was not triumph, not yet. But it was survival sharpened into something that could cut deeper than any blade. The Ordai had always believed pain was their tool. Now they had learned that pain could belong to others, that humans could carry it, wield it, and turn it back. The prisoners slept in shifts, some watching the gates, some whispering to each other in voices hoarse but steady. The fortress around them creaked and groaned, its heart broken, and above, in orbit, Ordai captains stared at their silent comms and wondered if the infection could reach them too. One of them whispered to himself, claws trembling against his console. "What if they laugh in the dark of our own ships?" No answer came.
Only silence.
And silence was worse than screams. The galaxy had always believed the Ordai were inevitable. Their dominance was fact, their cruelty unshakable. But inevitability had cracked on the stones of a frozen plain, in the lungs of dying humans who refused to give up the sound of laughter. The fortress stood, broken but still towering, its shadow cast across the ice. And within it, the survivors gathered strength, their silence heavier than war drums. What now? The question lingered, unspoken but alive, and the answer waited, pulsing in every shard, every scar, every breath drawn against the weight of the galaxy. We keep walking. The fortress was quiet. Not the quiet of control, not the orderly silence of a conquered stronghold, but the silence of aftermath, the kind that drips like blood into stone, the kind that whispers even louder than screams. Smoke curled from shattered towers, lights flickered weakly in the halls, and the air smelled of fire, metal, and the stubborn tang of human survival. The prisoners had become more than prisoners. They walked the corridors now with weapons in hand, shards glowing faintly, their breath rattling but steady. They were no longer shadows pressed into cages. They were shadows that moved where they pleased, unafraid of what came next. The elder Ordai still lived. He dragged himself through the ruins of his throne room, claws scraping against the broken floor. He passed the bodies of his guards, the splintered remains of banners, the overturned brazier that once lit his victories. His armor hung loose, cracked wide at the chest, leaking dark blood that stained every step. He did not look like a conqueror anymore. He looked like prey. He felt the weight of every eye on him as he stumbled into the hall where the humans gathered. They did not raise their weapons. They did not jeer. They only stared with hollow, burning eyes. Silence pressed on him like a mountain. His voice, once thunder, broke into a whisper. Why?
None of them answered. They didn't need to.
The silence was the answer. The Ordai's empires had been built on noise, screams, commands, the thunder of marching boots, the roar of conquered worlds. Now the humans answered with nothing at all, and it was louder than everything he had ever known. Beyond the fortress, the galaxy trembled. Messages had already slipped out, half-coherent reports, broken comms, fragments of sound carried by desperate hands. Other species, huddled in the dark corners of space, heard the whispers. Prey had risen. The Ordai fortress had fallen. not to fleets or armies, but to the endurance of the broken. And with every retelling, the story grew. Some said the humans had walked through fire and not burned. Others claimed they had torn the elder limb from limb. Some swore the laughter still echoed across the frozen plains, a sound that no storm could drown.
It didn't matter what the truth was.
What mattered was that something unkillable now lived in the imagination of the galaxy, and in the hearts of the Ordai, something else lived: fear. Fear crawled through their barracks, through their war councils, through the cold steel of their ships. Captains hesitated to open their comms. Commanders snapped at shadows. Soldiers looked at the prisoners in their cages and saw not weakness, but a reflection of what had gutted their fortress. The survivors of the battle sat in the ruined halls, sharing scraps of food, binding wounds with torn banners, whispering only when necessary. Their silence was not emptiness. It was weight. It was proof. Every breath they took was another strike against inevitability. Every step they had left was another wound in the myth of Ordai supremacy. One night, as they huddled by the fire of shattered timbers, a woman spoke. Her voice was cracked, but it carried. "They'll come again." The others listened. Flames licked the shadows across their faces, making them look older, harder. "Yes," another answered. "They'll come." The man with the pipe lay near the fire, his body broken past repair. His breath rattled in his chest, shallow but stubborn. His eyes opened slowly, and though he could no longer rise, he turned his head toward them. "They'll come," he whispered, voice thin as smoke. "And so will we." His eyes closed, but the words lingered. The next morning, the prisoners marched from the fortress. Some staggered, some crawled, some leaned on each other. They left the elder alive, broken on his throne, to live with the echo of what he had seen. The Ordai would remember. Their walls had not fallen to bombardment. They had fallen to something they had never measured, something they could never measure. The humans walked across the frozen plains, shards in hand, carrying the memory of fire and silence with them. They did not know where they were going, or if they would ever find freedom beyond this world. But they knew one thing: they would not stop. The galaxy would learn the truth, sooner or later.
That pain was not weakness.
That fragility was not surrender. That prey did not always kneel. Somewhere in the void, in the hearts of those who still suffered under the Ordai, a new sound stirred. Not yet laughter, not yet silence, but the beginnings of something that would spread like fire across the stars. The elder, left to rot in his fortress, whispered into the darkness. "I thought we'd break," he said, though no one listened. His claws trembled as the words left him. They didn't. The silence answered, and it was enough. Humanity has always been underestimated. They called us fragile, brittle, temporary. They thought suffering would crush us. But what the Ordai and the galaxy learned is simple. Our pain is not their victory. Our pain is our weapon. We endure, we persist. We rise again. If this story lit something in you, if you felt that chill, that weight, that spark, then don't stop here. There are more battles, more stories of what it means to be human when the universe itself pushes back. Hit subscribe, stay with us, and step into the next tale of defiance.
Because this was only one fortress.
The galaxy is still waiting, and we're not done walking.